We are Heather and Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show. Hi, and welcome to another Evolve to Win show with Heather and Paul.
If you have ever been in a position where you've dealt with the pain of a mishire, then this episode is for you, because today we're going to talk about how 80% of mishires actually come from the recruiting process. You're doing something wrong. 80% of turnover comes from hiring mistakes. And so one of the things that we want to explore in this episode is really taking a look at what the process should look like. And unfortunately, a lot of times we find that when our clients are in need of making a new hire, they don't have the luxury of hiring slow. As we all know, we're supposed to hire slow, fire fast.
Right.
But it's a fire drill, right? When you lose a key employee, you're scrambling to get that next person on board.
Yeah, and especially now with the economy as good as it is, and especially, with the unemployment rate as low as it's been such a long time that hiring hasn't been very difficult. It's been pretty easy to find good people because there's just been an abundance of them. But lately, I'm hearing from our clients that it's becoming more difficult to find good employees again because there's so many options out there. And so how can you mitigate that process, that problem of hiring somebody good and making sure that you do find the right person? And we are going to talk to you about one of the coolest processes. And I know there's a lot of people that do not use this, have never even heard of it before, or maybe have heard about it, but have never understood what the process is. And we're going to take you through that.
And this process is going to be able to take you from, statistically proven by the company who we work with, from a flip of a coin, like a 50-50 chance of getting this job match right, getting the right candidate for the right job.
And how many do you feel when you hire somebody, it's a 50-50 chance that you're going to hire somebody and they're going to work out or they're not going to work out for you?
Right. Because you could be doing the flip of a coin process right now, or you can get up as high as a 93% likelihood of getting the right candidate in place. And
Yeah.
Look, it's such a big deal. I mean, this is really a very, very important conversation, because for those of you who have done any amount of recruiting, I'm sure you've felt the pain of having recruited someone, you thought they were going to be a great fit. The other people who interviewed that person thought they were going to be a great fit. And it took almost a year to figure out that it was a terrible match, maybe either culturally or just something broke bad and you couldn't, you don't know why. So depending on the role that you're hiring for, the studies show on average approximately 5 times the cost of the salary are the hard costs of a mishire.
Yeah, not to mention the time.
Well, that doesn't include the soft costs, which is your time in trying to fix the situation, the manager's time trying to fix it, the employee morale that maybe has been damaged, lost customers, lost productivity. There's so many other soft costs that you can't even possibly calculate. But we're talking about a really, really important decision financially and culturally for your organization.
And I think what's missing in most hiring processes is that they're generalized. So they're generalized for, a particular person. And what we're going to talk to you about is a customized, like really customized to your specific business, to the job, and that you decide on exactly who that person is and what the job requirements are for that position. And you do it, and we're going to take you through that process now, but you do it through your own people. And I think, we've seen amazing results from it. And it is just one of the coolest processes. I never really thought about it before until we started it.
Well, and what we're going to do, we're going to bring you through a very high level conversation of this process. So you will be missing details. If you want details, if you need details, please reach out to us separately. You can find us at heather@heatherchristie.com, Paul@evolveglobal.com. But for right now, let's just go over the high level process. So what's step 1 in this customized hiring process?
So what we're talking about is job benchmarking. So why don't you explain job benchmarking to them?
So the whole concept of job benchmarking is, think of a role within your organization that you either have a need to fill or you have multiple needs to fill because there's a lot of turnover. So think of a sales role maybe in your organization. if the job could talk to you, what would it say? That's what you want to be thinking about. So we're going to get really specific to the job and what the requirements are for the individual who takes that job. And you want to know some things like what behaviors are required. What are the behaviors that would make someone super successful in this role? What are the motivators that the individual should possess? Meaning, what will drive them to take action? We're driven very differently depending on our internal motivators, which, by the way, are hidden from our sight. You also want to know what sort of competencies or soft skills would make this candidate a superior candidate for the position. And so it's really all about, if a job could talk, what would it say to you?
Right.
Now, how do we go through and find that process?
And make it customized.
And customize that process for every single job? First of all, we've got to find a group of what we call SMEs, or subject matter experts, right?
Right.
So, and I want you to be thinking about your own process and the needs that you have in recruiting. Have you been through this process where you pull anywhere from 3 to 5 people together who are so intimately familiar with the job that they could tell you everything there is to know about it? So as an example, if we're talking about a sales job, who would be some SMEs that we might be thinking about calling on?
Well, definitely the sales manager would want to be one, because working so closely with the person. But also, I think, finding that 1 or 2 top performers. So find your top salespeople, because everybody's always like, well, if we could just duplicate this person.
Can we clone this
right?
person?
Yeah, if we could do that. So why don't you? So grab that person, and they would be a part of the SME group, so the subject matter expert group. So you'd have a sales manager, maybe 1 top salesperson, maybe 2, and then who else would be?
So who else interacts very closely? I mean, one of the mistakes that we've seen made over and over again is you have somebody recruiting for a position, or maybe defining a position, who doesn't even work with the position. So as an example, a lot of times this is relegated to HR. And of course, HR plays a critical role in the recruiting process. But if the HR is not involving these SMEs who work very closely with this role, then we're going to be missing a lot in terms of defining those competencies and behaviors and motivators. So you might even think about a customer. Do you have a customer who you know very well, who's worked very closely with your salespeople? They could really help you define what it is that made them want to work with this person.
Exactly.
Oftentimes, salespeople will work with operations very closely, because the salespeople have to sell the product or service, and then there's somebody in the company that has to deliver. Usually they're not the same person. So if there are any departments that work very closely with that particular role, that would be a great person to call on.
And every one of those SMEs have different reasons that it's their own biases, right? They have different reasons why, or what they think this salesperson's job needs to be.
Right, different perspectives.
Right?
Yes.
And so if you only have one person defining what that job role is and who they're looking for, they may use their own biases to hire for that person.
They will.
They will.
They
yeah,
will,
exactly.
because they can't help it, because that's where human beings.
So that's the first step,
Yeah,
is
first
defining who those
Step
3 to
one.
5 subject matter experts are.
And why do we want to have those subject matter experts? What's step 2?
Because you want to define the accountability. So again, you want to go to either 3 to 5 key accountabilities for the position. And with only one person, they could come up with a couple accountabilities. But when you get all 5 SMEs speaking about it and having somebody facilitate that process of helping them understand, what truly are the 3 to 5 competencies or accountabilities that are necessary for this position, you may come up with some that you thought were really important, but actually aren't. And so that's what you want to get to with this group.
And
that process only takes, can take less than, half an hour, maybe an hour at the most.
Yeah, it doesn't have to take a really long time, especially with facilitation. It makes it a lot easier. But when you're thinking about these key accountabilities, it's so critical that they're defined, because it's the most important accountabilities of a job that we're going to then say, okay, what behaviors are needed for this accountability, what motivators, what competencies, right?
Right.
So when you think about sales, let's give some sample key accountabilities for a salesperson. Prospecting is probably going to be one of them.
Follow-up.
Unless it's not. Follow-up is going to be one of them. And you think about those 2 have some different skill set, just those 2 alone. There may be some technical skills required. There may be, so definitely going to be customer facing.
Communication. I mean, it's going to be
Communication.
a huge, coming up with accountability around that. But the important thing to know is it's when you get those SMEs, those subject matter experts around in a room together and they start talking about those key accountabilities, they come up with it. And this is the customized portion of it, is that they are truly coming up with the key accountabilities for that. It's not anybody else defining it. It's them.
We wouldn't
as a
tell
group.
our clients what those accountabilities are.
Right.
They tell us. But it's really powerful, though, to get those 3 to 5 people together ultimately to agree on what those accountabilities are. So we would do maybe a blind test first. Every one of you get back to us with what those 3 to 5 accountabilities are for the role. Then we put them all together, present them to the group when the group is all together. And now they've got to whittle it down and come up with number 1, most important, number 2, number 3, and there's a process to do all of that. Right. So I want you to just stop for a moment. We've given you step 1 and step 2. And I'm wondering how many of you already do that right now within your organizations for each of the roles that are really important, whether it's an executive role that you're hiring for or a sales role, whatever it is. Part of the power of this process is that you do this in advance before you've actually lost the person. You're actually trying to figure out before you have the need arise, what would you need in this role to find the perfect candidate? Right?
Well, and the reason we wanted to speak about this particular topic was because we've seen throughout the years the different, really the most simplistic ways of hiring people. Mm-hmm. And usually
what's the typical way that you would suggest companies go through a hiring process?
Well, the company either decides to fire somebody or that somebody leaves, mm-hmm. right? And then all of a sudden they need to kick into gear and find a replacement for that person mm-hmm. or that job role. And what do? They immediately get out on, a website and put out an ad for that position. Mm-hmm. And it's just an ad that was written maybe by HR or maybe by the person who's works closely with that role.
And you guys have done this before, right? You've been in the position where you've had to either go find an old job description that you can repost or like throw one together really quickly because you've got to get that process started because you've got to start getting resumes in, right? So you're doing the ad.
Then you do the ad, then you collect, some of the applications.
You weed through the resumes.
Yeah.
Have an interview. Right. So then the interview, some people will actually go the next step and do some background checking and
depending
checking
on the position.
Yeah,
for sure.
But after the interview, usually you'll do a hire. Some people will do an assessment, right? Mm-hmm. And assessments really, really help the ability to get the right kind of hire if you know what you're looking for in the assessment, mm-hmm. right? So sometimes we know that there are some organizations, they do assessments, but they may or may not really have the right target created. This is where benchmarking starts to come in. And then after they do the hire, they'll do some level of onboarding and training for the position. Right. So that's usually a typical process.
Yeah.
All right. So we've given the first 2 steps. We've got, get the group of 3 to 5 subject matter experts, come up with the key accountabilities. What's the next one?
The next one then is having those SMEs, the subject matter experts, facilitate that process of asking them if we could, so we're having them take an assessment, but it's an assessment that's for this job role.
Okay, so they're going to be taking the assessment as though they are the perfect candidate based on everything we've already learned about key accountabilities and what behaviors are required, what motivators are required, what competencies are required. So think about this. It's like getting everybody in alignment and in agreement on what's most important. Everybody from the person who's already doing really well at the job and here's what I do to those who are surrounding them saying here's what we think is needed. So getting agreement on that with your SME is how powerful. So what you're doing is you're creating imagine a dartboard, you're creating the bullseye.
Right.
Right? Okay. Now, I want to go to the statistics for a moment of the assessment. So there are many companies out there who are currently using a behavioral assessment, something like DISC, to really look at what are the kinds of behaviors that would be a perfect match for this candidate. The statistics show that when you do an assessment like DISC,
which is one
of the sciences, your likelihood of getting the right hire goes up to about 60% compared with a 50-50, mm-hmm. right? So that's a great first step is to use DISC. When you add a second science in, like motivators, right? Motivators, remember, are hidden from our view, but it's really what drives someone to take action. That goes up then to an 80% likelihood of getting the right match. So from 60 to 80, that's a massive jump, right?
Mhm.
When you add a third science to it, something like competencies or soft skills,
Right.
that's when it goes up to a 93% likelihood of getting the right candidate. So you think about that.
And that's using the assessment without really the benchmarking portion of it. So having it customized. So that's just a general assessment being used. There's a lot of companies that use that, just different types of assessments, and maybe use 2 or 3 sciences with it. But with the job benchmarking process, what it does is it creates, you're basically creating your own assessment for that particular job role, which is just amazing, because now when you assess that person, it's not generalized. It's you can then, what we do is we pull a report after the candidate. So we bring a candidate in, they take the assessment, and then we can pull a gap report. And what the gap report is what we've come up with, like the SMEs have come up with, and the key accountabilities and the assessment that this is the perfect person. And then the candidate takes one, and then we're able to pull that gap report. And the gap report tells us,
It tells us exactly whether this candidate actually matches up with what they said they need to match up with. And of course, you've ranked things in order of priority as well. So you're going to get a coded report that basically gives the green light, like the thumbs up,
Yep.
or the watch out here. Now, let me put my lawyer hat on for a minute. It's really important that you guys know this, that when it comes to using assessments in the hiring process, there are laws that we have to comply with. And first and foremost, you've got to be using validated assessments. And the only way you can ever know if something is validated is by actually asking the assessment company to send you their validation reports, because there are so many tools out there that are not scientifically valid, which means you can get in a lot of trouble and spend a lot more money, like put you under kind of money, if you get in trouble with that.
well, and just in general too, that assessments can only be used for 1/3 of the hiring decision.
that
So
is key number
that's the
2.
general, yeah.
So meaning that you need to make sure you have the interview process and the selection process, everything else. The assessment can only count as 1/3 of the weight of what you're using to determine whether or not somebody is a match for the job.
Right. And the third part of that is that if you are using an assessment for hiring for a position, you can't use it on one person and not use it on another person, or your hiring process has to be consistent throughout as you're hiring for a position. And so if you're using assessment, then use it all the way through. If you're not going to use
Same
one, then
assessment,
don't use one.
all candidates,
Yes.
every time you hire, or you're also going to get in trouble. Okay, legal hats off again. And by the way, I am not giving you legal advice right now. So even though I say I have my lawyer hat on, this really is not meant to be legal advice. It's probably a good idea to talk with your corporate counsel just to make sure that you're doing the process correctly. Now, let's get back to the process overall. So we gave step 1, which is about gathering
So
your
this is
subject
benchmarking. This is benchmarking for a position, for a role.
for recruiting for a certain position.
Exactly.
Step number 1 is getting your subject matter experts together. Step number 2 is identifying the key accountabilities. Step number 3 is getting an assessment taken that has the ideal candidate's information plugged in.
Right.
That's done by the SMEs and a facilitator if you choose to work with a facilitator. And then step number 4, you actually do your recruiting for the candidates. When you've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 of the best candidates for the job, you give them their own assessment, and it produces a gap report to show you where they're right on, where they're off. And what's really great about this, think about this. Let's say that you've done all of your due diligence, you've done your homework, you find the perfect candidate, and then you have them take the assessment, and it's a perfect match. Like, this is a perfect match for this job. There are 2 or 3 areas where you know that this candidate can use development. You've identified it so specifically before this person is ever brought on that allows you to understand their development needs, so you can actually customize your onboarding process and or your training process to start working immediately, have that manager immediately work on developing the areas that the candidate fell short. It is rare that you're going to get everybody as a 100% perfect match, but you'll see where, they're either in the green zone or they're not in the green zone.
Yeah, and just to kind of finish this off, I love the job benchmarking process because of the customization. I think that's so key. And I know I've been hired many times for jobs. I've never been through a process where, and I've taken assessments for jobs, but I've never, ever had like one that was, a customized report that was actually being created. So if you really want to make, the hiring process much easier on yourself and give yourself a way better opportunity of hiring the right person the first time. Make sure, go through the front end process. So if you're interested in this and this sounds like something that you may want to incorporate, or just want to find out a little bit more information about it, just get in touch with us and let us know, and we'd be happy to go through that in a little more detail than what we're doing currently on this podcast.
Yeah, and I think about it, it's definitely hugely valuable on the front end hiring process. But where I think about it so much is how many people have struggled when you have the wrong person in a role and you've had them in for so long, and there's some really good stuff, but they're causing trouble. They're taking a lot of your manager's time. They're maybe not getting along so well or frustrating the other people within the department. So it's kind of like, when you think about having A players in the various roles within your organization, this is what this process is really about, finding those A players. So again, just go back and take a look at your current recruiting process. Have you actually taken the time to truly identify those key accountabilities, how these people are being measured for the results that they're supposed to produce in this role? When just that piece of the process alone is so critical to really identify who that ideal candidate would be.
Yeah. So thank you again for watching or listening to Evolve to Win with Heather and Paul, and we hope you have a great day.
If you haven't connected with us yet, you can go to heatherchristie.com and sign up for our leadership list. Have an awesome day.